All right, we are recording now. Jeff Miller, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having.
Yeah, well, thanks for being on, man. I really do appreciate it. I saw that you interacted with a couple of the tweets, that I put out for the Mark Tippett's episode, and after seeing after seeing you through that, I wanted to bring you on the show and wanted to start off by saying, congratulations on becoming the Brazos County Libertarian Party chair.
Thank you.
I know it was relatively recently. I don't know when exactly you got elected, but I mean,
Those,
congratulations. How does that feel?
that was back in March, and it was kind of a weird situation because even though I had been the vice chair for the last 2 years, I had no idea that the chair was planning on not running for reelection. He just sort of made it a casual announcement at one of the meetings in February, so it was kind of like didn't really have a lot of time to think about it or consider it, but I just decided to go ahead and try to do it, and I was successful. So that's all there is to that. I'm focusing on trying to get more people in, grow the party locally, and do whatever I can to try to get the message out.
Yeah, no, it's really good too, man. I think I think having libertarians involved on a real, local county level is just it's so important for having like a homegrown base, that you can work with. But with you being the chair of the county party, and you're also running for a state house in District 14, and I know that you've been volunteering with Mark Tippett's campaign, who was on the show recently. I mean, how do we were just talking before this, you've always got busy weeks. I mean, how do you find the time to do all these different things that you're involved with?
Well, it's not easy because I have a full-time job like a lot of people do. But thankfully, I have the kind of job that I'm not constantly busy with work. I kind of stuff kind of comes and goes throughout the day. So at my office, I can do some of the Libertarian Party activities when I'm at work, which helps because it's if I only could do it when I was off of work, I would have limited hours to do it. But yeah, it's juggling a lot of different things and having to make sure that I have alerts and things set, so I'm reminded of all sorts of online meetings and all that sort of stuff. Sometimes I just end up having to do more than one thing at once. Like in addition to what you mentioned, I'm also on the state Libertarian Committee for the first time. I was also elected to that in April at the state convention, so I'm one of the
Mhm.
two representatives for Senate District 5. And so I've got something related to my duties for that coming up Tuesday night, where I'm going to be interviewing somebody who's potentially a future county chair in another county in our district. And at the same time I'm doing that, Mark Tibbetts is going to be doing a Ask Me Anything online stream. So I'm going to be monitoring uh, online for questions for that at the same time. So already there's an example of
Golly.
something where I'm kind of having to multitask.
Yeah, what do you do for a quote unquote normal job, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, I'm an office manager. Work for a company that owns 25 different Subway sandwiches locations. So we have,
Okay.
yeah, different places in the state of Texas, but here in Bryan College Station, all of the ones around here, and then several of the ones in neighboring towns. So I do a bunch of paperwork related to that, HR related stuff mostly, and just yeah, juggling paperwork and answering phones and whatever else I need to do.
Golly, man. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know how you do it. All the different things you've got going on. I have no idea. And you do all of this stuff out of College Station there?
Yep, yep.
What's College Station like? I've been living in Texas for a little over a year. I'm in San Antonio. I haven't made my way up to College Station area. What's it like up there?
Well, it's a college town, as you can probably tell by the name of the city. It's where Texas A&M is.
A&M.
So much of the everything in town is revolves around the university and events that are going on there. But over the years we've added some things that were not specifically university related. So like we've got the George Bush Presidential Library, and that brings some people to town. And
Oh, wow.
there's some other there are things in Bryan College Station that aren't directly related to the university. So it's most of the school year, pretty heavy traffic because of the amount of people for the size of the town we have. There's
Yeah.
always construction going on, always new housing going up, because ever since they uncapped the student maximum at the A&M, we get more and more students every year. So, it's a lot of that. So it's, dodging bad drivers and, all that kind of wonderful stuff.
Oh, man. Yeah.
But there's a
College
lot of good
kids.
things. Yeah, there's we, of course, as we've grown, we've gotten a lot more schools and parks and all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of families here, and a lot of people rate the schools pretty highly and say that it's fairly safe compared to some other places of our size. So there's a lot of positive things. I like a lot of things about this area. I've been here 40 years now. So
Oh, wow.
yeah. But I actually get down to San Antonio quite a bit. That's where my mother lives, and her side of the family is from. So I'm there, at least a few times a year, and sometimes more, depending on what's going on.
Oh, it's a wonderful city. I had never even visited before I moved down, but I've really enjoyed it so far. Just renewed my lease a little while back. Really love it. I didn't know, I had never been up to College Station area, but I guess this past weekend was like the move in weekend for
Mm-hmm.
A&M. So I got a lot of like weird tweets on my timeline talking about like how bad the traffic in College Station is. And
It's still better than Austin, though.
I just helped a friend move from San Antonio to Austin, and I've been up in the city a couple of times now, and every time I'm there, the traffic is just brutal. And that stretch from San Antonio to Austin uh,
Yeah,
is not really a lot of fun either.
yeah, I've
But
driven it many times.
oh, it's just brutal. But man, you're about as heavily involved with libertarian politics as I can imagine one person being, with all these different things you're juggling. How did you get your start in politics, just in general?
Well, that's kind of one of those. Do you want the short version or the really long version kind of questions? Because I mean, when I tell people, because there's sometimes one of those questions will come up on Twitter or Facebook or something, and they'll say like, "What's your earliest memory?" Uh, or the earliest memory that you can put a date on. And for me, that was the inauguration of Ronald Reagan, because obviously I know that happened on a certain day. So I know that it was January 20th, 1981. And I remember asking my mother, like, basically what was going on. I was 4 years old at the time, or yeah, four. So I'm, saying, well, and she said, oh, well, we have a new president. And, the old president, Jimmy Carter, was there at the inauguration. So I said, well, did he not want to be president anymore? She said, no, he lost the election. So he's not allowed to be president anymore. And I remember thinking, that's not fair. So one of my first connections with politics was like how unfair it was that the president wanted to stay and they kicked him out. But, so that was another, my mother used to say that, the thing that she always respected about me from an early age when I was a kid was my sense of justice. So I think that was probably part of it. But fast forward like 7 years, and my parents both went to precinct meetings on the night of the primary election. And my mom went to the Democrat Party one, and my dad went to the Republican. So I had to choose, which one I wanted to go to. And I picked Republican. Again, not because at 12 years old I had any kind of profound idea as to what the party stood for, but I just decided, I liked that one better at the time for whatever reason. Ironically, in today's world where they talk about Republicans are red and Democrats are blue,
Mhm.
at that time, part of the reason I picked Republican is that I remembered that I had seen the pictures on TV of the candidates, and the Republicans were blue. So I liked blue better than red. So, so I picked it anyway. Um, but over the next few years after that, I kind of had that kid growing up, kind of casual. I would see the news, I would see what was going on with politics, but it wasn't obviously, I didn't know all the details of everything or understand what was going on. But, as I got older, I paid more attention. The 92 election, I was a junior in high school, and I voted for Ross Perot in our little mock election. And so that was my first example of like being actually crushed as I watched election returns come in. He didn't win a single state. And I'm like, man, this is terrible. And then a couple of years later in 94 was my first actual election I got to vote in, because I turned 18 in August of 94. And that was the year in Texas where George W. Bush was challenging Ann Richards for the governor spot. And I didn't like either one of them. At the time, I actually grew to like George W. quite a bit after that. But at that time, one of the things he really campaigned on was bringing back the death penalty. And I was against the death penalty, so I didn't want him to do that. But I didn't like Ann Richards either. So anyway, we come to election time, November 94, and I got my ballot and I looked at the candidates, and there was another guy on the ballot for governor named Kerry Ellers, the Libertarian candidate. And I said, I don't know anything about this guy, but I'm voting for him. So in my very first election, I voted for a Libertarian, not knowing anything about what they stood for. And a couple of years later, in 96, what happened in the fall of 94 election is that was the first time the Republicans took over the House in 40 years or whatever it was. So there was this big, Republican revolution and all that. And I, like a lot of people, got swept up in that, thought these politicians actually mean what they say. They're going to reduce government and all this, change everything in the way that everything works. And, that lasted a few months before people just sort of fell into the same old habits that they always did as far as politicians in Washington. So I was very disillusioned by all that. But for a while there, I was following very closely. Like, that was at the time where they first started putting stuff online, like congressional debates and testimonies and the stuff like that. So I would get on there and I'd actually read like full bills and committee reports and things like that. This is, at 18, 19 years old. So obviously I was a bit of a geek for that kind of stuff while there were other people out partying. I was reading this stuff. So it gives you an indication. But come, election time in 96 or primary season, and I went to, I remembered what I did back in 88 with my dad. And I was like, well, do they still do this precinct meeting on election night? And sure enough, they did. So I went to that for the Republican primary, and, they asked if anybody wanted to be a delegate to the county convention. So I'm like, sure, I'll be a delegate to the county convention. So I did. I went there, and in my usual style, I was not going to just sit there and not do anything. They had debates on the platform planks, or if anybody wanted to like speak for or against a part of the platform. Well, there was a part on there about a constitutional amendment to make English the official language. So I got to speak against that plank, and I debated Al Jones, who was the sitting Brazos County judge at the time, because he spoke in favor of it and I spoke against. So, but I remember that he respected my viewpoint, even though he disagreed with me when I made the point that, isn't it the Democrats that are always wanting to get more and more federal control of things? And then we've got this amendment saying the federal government is going to tell you what the official language has to be for everything. And he said, yeah, that's a good point. So anyway, so that kind of, I think, shows a couple of things about me. One, that I'm willing to get involved in stuff, but I also wasn't afraid to, get up and debate an elected official on something. I'm not going to say I didn't have a little bit of fear, but I mean, I was willing to do it. And that same year, later in the year, I heard Harry Brown for the first time, who was the Libertarian nominee for president in 96. And he was on like a PBS show, I think, or something, and they interviewed him where they actually give him more than like a tiny soundbite. He got to actually answer some questions.
Mm-hmm.
And I was impressed with a lot of the things he said. He had his book out where it was like huge tax cuts now, huge spending cuts now. And I'm like, this is the kind of thing that the Republicans campaigned on, but then didn't actually deliver on.
Right.
So obviously that appealed to me. So I sent off and I actually joined the National Libertarian Party for whatever the dues was then, like $15 or something like that. And so I got the paper newsletter for a year for doing that. Come 97, I didn't renew it and I moved on to whatever it is I was doing at that point in my life. But I never completely disengaged from politics. I just obviously had plenty of other interests. And by the time year 2000 rolled around, I had a young child, so that changed my life. My focus was on that. But at that point, I decided, I was fed up with the Republicans. I guess I'd never really had pursued much with the Libertarians. So I thought, well, at that point, I'll see about the Democrats. So I actually participated in the process of becoming a delegate to the county and for the Democrats also. And in my area, they're way outnumbered by the Republicans. So they actually, gave me the opportunity to be a state delegate because, they didn't have a lot of people volunteering for that.
Right.
But I didn't end up getting to go, mostly financial reasons. And having a young child, just, couldn't afford for all the babysitting and to be able to get up to wherever it was, Dallas or Fort Worth somewhere, I think. Anyway, so I didn't make it to that. But at that point, I had, in a way, participated in Republican, Democrat, and Libertarian parties. And in my elections, I had always tried to keep an open mind and vote for the individual rather than the party. So there was almost never, like, they had the straight party ticket voting, but they had the thing where you could select that and then still select individual people. So there were times that I would do that, but I never was like, there was never a ballot where I said, well, this is just a vote all people of this party. The irony of that is that by the time that we got rid of straight ticket voting in Texas, I had become fed up enough with Republicans and Democrats that I swore I wasn't ever going to vote for any of them again. And so at this point, I probably would vote straight Libertarian Party if such a thing existed, but it doesn't anymore.
Right.
But anyway, it was 2020, so many years later when I finally actually officially joined the Libertarian Party, in the sense that I showed up to the precinct convention for the Libertarian Party and actually affiliated with the party. And, by the end of that week, we had our county convention and I got elected vice chair. So again, another example of where I just kind of jumped in. It was like, not only am I joining this, but, already put me in a leadership position off the bat, not having any idea what I was doing. So that's, as you can tell, kind of a theme of my life, is that I volunteer for things, I jump into stuff, and then I try to figure it out after I've already committed myself to something.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like you half-ass a whole lot. Like you've been with the Democrats, the Republicans, and the Libertarians, and it seems like each time, whichever path you're on, you went all in on it. You didn't just put one foot in and one foot out. I mean, it seems like you really, really committed, and even early on, like like your willingness to kind of think outside the box and not be forced into a duopoly, right? Like you said, vote. You might vote mostly one way, but you did usually split your ticket some, and voting for Ross Perot like you did, or voting Libertarian in the Bush Richards election. I mean, it always, hearing your story, it seems like it might have taken you a while to officially join the Libertarian Party, but the signs were there early on, it seems.
Yeah, I've always been independent. I've always been a contrarian. At the same time, I'm the kind of dork that watches a politician give a speech and gets emotionally involved. So I don't entirely fall for things like I did when I was 18, 19, where I'd actually, believe in somebody enough to actually get, really upset when they lost, or if they won and didn't do what they said they were going to do. And now I'm much more cynical about it. I don't believe, any politician's really going to do 100% of what they promise they're going to. But Yeah, as far as getting involved, I'm like, why be there if you're not going to do that? I mean, that's always been the way that I was. Like, it's not, doesn't mean I don't, observe things and kind of sit back sometimes. I don't always speak up in every situation, because some of it is, when it comes to committee meetings and conventions and stuff, a lot of it is just sort of observing the process and seeing how things are done. So, I recently was, after I was a state delegate, then I was a national delegate to the convention in Reno. So I had a lot of fun there, but I wasn't getting up on the microphone and speaking, and things like that. So, I
Hmm.
don't regret that. I could have done that, but I figured I was enjoying things enough, participating in everything that I was doing, that I didn't think I had to do that, but I'm not afraid to do that if I need to. So that's that's kind of the deal with me, is I feel like there are things where I know clearly, here's what I want to do, here's what I believe in, and I can speak to it. And then there's other times where, I'm kind of looking at it like, I can see both sides of this, or I'm interested in hearing different points of view and kind of figuring out where I fall on this. So I'm not an ideologue. I've never have been. I've had like kind of basic principles that I believe in. And then
Hmm.
beyond that, I'm really more of a pragmatist in a lot of ways. I feel like, you know, do things that actually work. And that's another way of how I got to the Libertarian Party, because I saw demonstrated over and over again that the way the Democrats and Republicans operated was never going to bring more liberty, less government, more freedom. Like, all those things were just slogans and buzzwords that were used by the politicians to try to, secure their own power. And
Right.
so I looked at it and said, the only way that those things are actually going to happen is somebody who is committed to that as their basic philosophy. It has to be, everything else is subordinate to that. Your goal, it's like Barry Goldwater said back in 1964, I'm not running to pass laws, I'm running to repeal them. That has to be the attitude, is like an actual real change, turning the ship around that's going the wrong direction, not continuing to attach band-aids to the leaks in the boat. It's not working.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a pretty, like you said, a very realistic, a very healthy way, to look at it. Was that mindset what caused you to want to run, for state house in this cycle, or what compelled you to do that? I'm wondering.
So that's another thing where I've always, kind of had the fantasy or idea that at some point I would run for public office of some sort. Probably a lot of kids have had that fantasy about running for president, or, something like that. And I'm no exception on that. But, before I do my presidential campaign, I figured, I got to start a little bit lower. Um, but actually, in the beginning, I guess, the end of last year, when it was coming up on the, deadlines for candidates, and our county chair, and I would say a very active member of our county party, Clyde Garland, who's run for office many times before, he basically started recruiting candidates. And his purpose was to challenge those specific laws that they passed about the filing fees. So he wanted candidates locally that would run and agree, and that would not pay the filing fee. So basically, it was like, either we all get on the ballot or none of us do. Sort of all go down with the ship kind of thing.
Right.
So I was among the people, the end of last year, who volunteered to do that. So then it was just a matter of what office I run for. And I actually wanted to run for one of the county commissioner spots, because one of the things that I was passionate about, that really drove me to want to run against people, was in 2020, the way that the government just became so authoritarian in the name of virus mitigation. The everything became about, we got to shut down society in order to contain this virus. And it just, all of our freedoms and civil liberties be damned, none of that is important anymore. And it's one thing for the Democrats to go along with that, or kind of establishment Republican types, but when you have an area like I live in, that's seen as conservative Republican, and you have those same people that are elected officials that also just rolled over and accepted all of that. From the state level on down to local people. I mean, they had a county commissioners meeting where they didn't have any kind of public hearings. They didn't have any discussion. It was just, well, this is what CDC or state authorities and things are saying, so we're just going to vote it all in a rush job tonight and accept all these emergency things. And I thought that was a terrible way to approach it, and I was really irritated, to put it mildly, by that.
Oh yeah.
So I thought, well, I'll run for county commissioner. Well, the problem with that is that the way that they do the county commissioner and justice of the peace and a few things like that is they have 4 precincts in College Station or in the county, and they alternate every 2 years, like which ones are up for election. So it's the even districts one year, and then it's the odd ones another year. So my commissioner precinct is not up for election in 2022. It won't be again until 24. So because I wasn't going to move out of my precinct, and they have a residency requirement, you have to live in the precinct you run in. Well, that was out. So I had to look at what else was possible, and I kind of looked at the duties of, if I actually got elected to the position, would I be able to do whatever that position was? So there were things like county treasurer and clerk and stuff like that, where I'm like, I wouldn't really want to do that job or know how to do that job. And so ultimately I said, well, there's still one more local race that, even though technically it's a state position, it's entirely local, because our state house district is entirely within the city limits of Bryan College Station in Brazos County. Which obviously that's not true for everybody's state house district. Some of them include a ton of counties, but ours, just the way that it's drawn, is it's just Bryan College Station. So it's a local position that reports to somewhere else, if you know what I mean. So,
right.
And I thought, this actually works because, I feel like a representative of here, I've lived here for 40 years. Like I said, what better representative, could I be? Somebody who has grown up here, gone to the schools, raised my own son here, also worked here, and he came up in the schools here. And so I'm like, I have all this experience living here. I feel like I could do that job representing. The only, the real downside to it is because of the way that, for whatever reason, it's structured, the salary for that position is not very much. So it's kind of it's kind of one of those things where I would take a severe pay cut if I actually got elected. But, so we've often had people in that position that have the type of jobs where they're like business owners or things like that, where they can take 6 months off of their job and stay in Austin and go to legislature meetings and all that, and not worry about losing their job. So obviously, if I were to be elected, I'd have some decisions to make when it comes to that. But yeah, that was ultimately, I told Clyde and told Bruce, our previous county chair, that I'll run for state representative. And so I filled out the paperwork and I actually assisted in getting some of the other candidates' paperwork done, because I'm also a notary public. So I did that paperwork, and then we got all that turned in, and then we had our county convention, and I was nominated. So that's how that happened.
Yeah, no, that's yeah, that's really awesome. And I think the COVID restrictions and everything that came along with that was it was real eye-opening for a lot of people. I think me included. I was very much so one of them. You never really thought about how quickly our civil liberties could just be snatched up with the stroke of a pen, or a decision made overnight without voter involvement or anything like that. I mean, just to go from living in a free and open society to not being able to stay out past a certain time, or having to wear a mask everywhere you go, or not being able to go into certain places unless you have like a fully updated vaccine card. And I mean, it really blew a lot of people's minds, myself included. Now, we don't have a lot of time left here. Our Zoom timer is started its little countdown. But I did have a couple other things I wanted to ask you. Um, maybe one of the more important ones being what are kind of the three big issues that you're focusing on your campaign, and how is that resonating with voters, have you found?
Well, I would say that, as I kind of hinted at earlier, the number one thing is reducing basically the size and the power of government and making it actually representative again, bringing the power back to the people, so to speak, is really the top issue. Everything else sort of revolves around that.
Mm-hmm.
So, when it comes to those type of restrictions and other things, there was an Emergency Powers Act that they used to justify a lot of that. So I would want to repeal that. I would want to repeal all of the laws that are in place that limit consenting adults making agreements and transactions. It's amazing how many things that the government wants a part in, either to tell you flat out you can't do it, or you can do it, but you have to have a permit or a license, or pay us this amount of fees, and property taxes. Another big thing. People are taxed in so many ways, where it's tax on top of tax.
Mm-hmm.
And if you leave something to somebody else as a gift or in your will, then you're taxed on top of that. And so there's just so much bureaucracy, taxes, layers and layers of government control. And my biggest thing is just trying to reduce as much of that as possible. So when it comes to individual legislation, our representative is John Rainey, a Republican, and he comes out and says, here's what I accomplished in the last legislature. And it's a list of new legislation that's passed, new bills. And I would have the complete opposite approach. If I have something like that at the end of my term, it would be, here's the things I got repealed. Here's the things that I got rid of that made you freer. So everything is about, what can I do to give you more freedom? Whatever it is that you're unable to do because there's government in the way, I want to help that get out of your way so you can do it. So as far as resonating with voters, basically every time that I hear someone in a conversation where they're complaining about something that they're unable to do, or regulations they've had to follow, or fees and taxes and things they've had to pay, that's where I'm like, well, vote Miller.
Right,
There's your
right.
way out of that. You've got a choice. You got somebody who's on your side. Small businesses that have either lost their business completely or been put in a really bad financial situation because of all the extra things they've had to do because of government restrictions or regulations. Every time I heard my boss complain about, well, we've got to do this and this on remodeling a building because there's all of these codes we have to follow. I'm not saying that every single city code or things like that is all a bad idea, but there's still so much that isn't about actual safety. It's about somebody's getting paid for this. Somebody is the one that says, oh, you have to pay this and get this permit and do these things, and and it's all about sort of maintaining that bureaucracy and those layers of control. So those are the type of things that I take every opportunity to say, if you had me in Austin, I'd be fighting to end that.
Yeah, that's really awesome. And I have to imagine that voters really like hearing a message like that. I talked with Mark Tippett on our episode about, just the state of Texas politics as a whole. I feel like there's so many races, in particular the Beto Abbott one, where, there's a lot of people that look at both of those choices and go, God, I don't want to vote for either of those guys. And you see that replicated just down the ticket. I mean, pretty much wherever you go. And, I hope people start, doing their own research and looking into libertarian candidates and other independent and third party candidates, and just know that they don't have to be forced into this duopoly. The system is set up in that way to make them feel trapped in one of the two parties. But I like taking, the opportunity on my show and in my personal life to let people know, like, hey, you you're not stuck with those two shitty choices. You you can vote libertarian if you want to feel good about your vote and support pro-liberty candidates. And we are
Yeah,
about to.
people around here are always, they'll vote Republican because they're scared of what would happen if the Democrats took over. Well, the whole point to me is let's bring the power back locally so you don't have to worry about who has the majority in Austin because they won't have that much control over you, so it won't matter as much.
Right. And that ultimately should be the goal. We've got about 2 minutes left here on our timer. Jeff, I really do appreciate you coming on to the show. I wanted to give you these last 2 minutes just to promote anything you want to promote, a website, any upcoming events, anything like that you've got.
Well, so we're going to find out, we're recording this on a Sunday and we're going to find out Friday whether or not that I'm actually going to be on the ballot for state rep, because that's when we'll at least hopefully find out about the results of the Republicans' lawsuit against us. We didn't even get into that in this, but anyway, they're trying to get 23 candidates off the ballot, including me, because of not paying those filing fees. So we'll find out the results of that, and because that's the deadline as far as getting the ballots going. And once we do, if I actually know that I will be on the ballot, that's when I'll do things like websites or other things, really kind of kick off the campaign in a more serious manner. So as far as now, anyone who wants to can follow me on Twitter at RealJeffster. And yes, I call myself that because I had the screen name Jeffster before any of these other people did. But then some people, they come along and they try to use my name. So
Right.
had to make sure people knew I was the real one. And yeah, coming up this Tuesday night too, the 23rd, we're doing a Mark Tippett's Ask Me Anything live stream. So anybody hopefully will tune into that, ask him questions, and I'll be part of doing all that stuff as well. So vote Miller, vote Libertarian.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Vote Miller, vote Libertarian, vote Mark Tippett, and all those other great Libertarian candidates. Jeff, thanks so much for coming on the show, man. I really do appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thanks a lot for having me.
All right, take it easy.